Today, I'm delighted to welcome Jenny Dearborn to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Jenny, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to speak with you today. For those who may not know your path from CHRO to author and advisor, please could you give a brief introduction to yourself and your journey that got you to where you are today?
Sure. I was a high school English, public speaking, and drama teacher for 2 years, just a very short period of time. And then an instructor, stand-up instructor at Hewlett Packard. And then from there, went into sales at a startup selling education services. And then from there back to HR, where I led a learning and development team at Sun Microsystems for a couple of years, and then moved up at Sun Microsystems to chief learning architect and then chief learning officer for the Americas, which was a P&L organization, so it had $100 million quota. Back to Hewlett Packard, reporting into HR, and then Success Factors as chief learning officer there. And then we were acquired by SAP. So my path has been reporting into HR, reporting into sales, reporting into HR, reporting into sales. And so I've had a very strong sort of business orientation because I've had to carry a quota and manage a P&L. And then whenever I was doing that, I sold to HR. So HR was my customer, HR was my client, or I was in HR. So I sort of had both of those perspectives. I was chief talent officer at SAP for 5 years, and then left and started a CHRO journey, Klaviyo, Product Board, a couple other places, and now I'm at BTS. And I've enjoyed wherever I've gone to write about my work experiences. And so the first book, Data Driven, was written when I was at Success Factors, and that was about the experience of running sales enablement at Success Factors. So that was a fictionalized case study, basically about our experience. The second book I wrote with my colleague David Swanson at SAP, and that was about taking those same algorithms to be able to pull data and understand how to calibrate your algorithm to maximize productivity in leadership, and that was at SAP. And then this was about how to take a data-driven approach across the whole enterprise. Yeah, so it's been a lot of different roles that's shaped my journey for sure.
No, really interesting. And we'll talk about the recently published Insight Driven Leader in a minute. But interesting, Jenny, most of our listeners are working in HR or servicing the HR industry, I would say, and you've done a bit of both of that. And I know we're going to be talking about, HR, probably needs to be much more commercially focused than it traditionally is. How does that kind of varied background help you, having, as you said, a number that you need to hit from a commercial perspective and then working as a practitioner as well? How did that commercial background help you as a practitioner?
Well, a ton of ways. You immediately have credibility in the room with business clients because you've, been in their shoes or sat in their seat or whatever metaphor you want to use. You are, your job is to make your quota and meet your customers' needs. And you're extremely focused and kind of terrified quarter over quarter about focusing on business results. And so it's incredible empathy. And also you understand the full product life cycle. I mean, you're living it, that you are trying to sell something to customers that maybe they don't want. So you have to go back to product and engineering and say, hey, the product, what I'm trying to sell has to be different to meet their needs. We're getting crushed in the market here by competitors. So that deep empathy, and then you're just always immersed in these conversations. It's an MBA by fire about, how your organization works. And then you move over to the HR side and your business clients, remember that you are right there, in the middle of the conversation. And all of a sudden, these things that we're arguing about in HR just seem ridiculous. Like, why are we wasting our time? Like, don't we know here in HR what the real problem is? It's that we're getting crushed by, when I was at Success Factors or something, it was like the real problem is we're getting crushed by Workday, not what we decide to name a program internally, like let's really focus on the company's problem. So it brings speed to everything you do. It brings incredible focus to everything you do. And it just snaps everything into perspective.
It sounds like you're suggesting to maybe those that are aspiring to be the HR leaders of the future to maybe spend some time outside HR.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best advice I ever got and repeat is if you want to have a career in HR leadership, the best thing to do is leave HR and come back. You have to have many, many years outside of HR. I think, from a career progression perspective that, horizontal is the new vertical in terms of career mobility. Given the longevity of our lives and our careers and our health span, and that we're not going to be able to retire at, the young age that our grandparents did, we're going to have a very long career with a compressed organizational structure. And if you want upward mobility, it has to be horizontal, for many years, many years to be able to reach, management levels at some point.
Well, it's great. I think hopefully that sets up our conversation quite well. I think we're going to be moving between HR and the business, I think, throughout this now. So you talked about the books. So the Insight Driven Leader is the third book, if I'm correct, that you've authored or co-authored. What inspired you to co-author this brilliant book? I have to say.
Oh, thanks. As a practitioner, I felt that we weren't having the right conversation in HR circles, that we were not addressing the real problem of what was holding HR back or what great HR looked like when it's done really, really well in an organization. Their secret to success was not what we were talking about at SHRM meetings or ATD meetings or something when we're talking to each other as HR practitioners. Our conversations were kind of missing the point of what really the most successful HR leaders did. And I wanted to figure out why. So in our incredibly turbulent world that we have, that we're, enjoying in air quotes, now, what is it that really, really makes HR differentiated, successful? And I personally believe that HR is more important than ever, given all of the, exciting / chaotic stuff that's going on in our world, especially with AI and the future of jobs and things like that. So given our role, how can we step up and be better?
Yeah, as you said there, it's an opportunity to lead, not follow, isn't it? So, and how do we do that?
Yeah, and I started with the idea that I felt like I knew the answer to my own question when I started, which was the answer was, being data driven, having a deep command of data analytics, people analytics, workforce analytics, being able to do incredible storytelling with that data in a business context. So I asked the question and I felt like I knew the answer. And when I dug into it, like, well, why aren't more HR leaders, very, very steeped in what you talk about all the time in your books and your conference? And, is like, why isn't every CHRO, your most devoted, follower? Like, what I found out was the the disconnect between the CHRO and the CEO is kind of the foundational challenge in the HR function. And the way through that is with data and analytics, the way through that challenge.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that struck me from reading the book, Jenny, is that disconnect that you've talked about of what HR ends up being compared to what it could be. And obviously you've been on the inside, you've seen it at first hand, in big companies, very progressive companies, I think, as much as I know some Microsystems, HP and SAP as well. When did it first hit you that HR to business or that CHRO to CEO relationship needed to fundamentally change?
When I was in the chief people officer role for the first time. That's when I really realized that relationship sets the tone for how HR is viewed, and how impactful and successful it can be for the entire organization. It cascades through the whole HR function. It cascades, horizontally across the leadership team, and it impacts all of the work that you do, and how much that CEO, CHRO are like really, really on the same page about the nature and the scope of the role and the expectations of the role. Is that role supposed to be an incredibly competent and successful administrator, making sure that everything that tactical that could be done is absolutely done, and trains run on time, and that's where most CEOs and CHROs are, and that's incredibly successful, but it's also limited. You could have a great company where it's just a really efficient administrative machine, or you could have an organization that is really where HR is really a strategic partner, and the CEO thinks every business problem is a people problem, and I'm not going to try and tackle any business problems unless I have my people person here with me advising every single step about product or about, supply chain or market penetration or expanding in other countries or whatever it is. And that your CHRO is your very first lieutenant. And there's some companies where they have that relationship, and they have outsized performance. They have outsized, results.
Yeah, and obviously one in the public domain is Microsoft. When Satya Nadella became the CEO, he brought Kathleen Hogan in from the business, and they changed the culture together. And I think that was very much the kind of the why Satya brought Kathleen in, and obviously they used data analytics to inform that journey. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Now we're going to talk a bit of like from a CEO perspective, which I think is going to be really interesting to our listeners. From an HR perspective, before we get into the kind of data elements around this, is it a lack of ambition from again, I don't want to generalize, because obviously clearly there's some absolutely fantastic chief people officers and HR leaders out there. Is it a lack of ambition, a lack of capability? What do you think holds, from the HR perspective, what do you think holds that where that disconnect is created from an HR perspective?
Yeah, I don't think it's a lack of ambition or capabilities at all. It's alignment of expectations. I've seen lots of times, if you think of a 2x2 grid, where what the CEO thinks of the HR function and what the CHRO thinks of the HR function. So in the bottom left corner is going to be perfect alignment of administrative. That's what the CEO thinks of HR, and that's how the HR thinks of themselves and their role, and they're perfectly aligned. And then in the top right-hand corner is going to be the CEO thinks the strategic business partner, and the CHRO thinks I'm supposed to be a strategic business partner. And that's the Microsoft, Satya, Kathleen example. Incredibly impactful. And so you could have a CHRO that's like, I'm supposed to be your strategic HR business partner, and I'm supposed to be in every business conversation. And a CEO is like, stay in your lane. Like, what are you doing? You're just supposed to make sure that everything, compliance is done and payroll is done, and, and that we keep our employee engagement number high and our attrition number low. That's your job. And they could be amazed. They could, I interviewed people for the book CHROs who said we had an incredibly aligned relationship with the CEO, and then a CEO change. And now they're, and then the new CEO after a quarter goes, I think you're a little too much you're more horsepower. I think what it was commonly said to the CHRO was, you're more horsepower than we need. We don't need strategic HR right now. We need basic HR. And so then that, and these are, imagine someone who, I interviewed a couple of people, some sort of a math science undergrad, and then they went into consulting, and then they get an MBA. I interviewed somebody, a Harvard MBA, a Stanford MBA, these big job, and then they went into the business in finance or marketing or something, and they rose through their career, and then they were tapped on the shoulder to run HR. And they did that incredibly successfully for 5 years or 7 years. CEO change. And then the new CEO says, what are you doing here? Like, this is why I don't get it. And they just don't have the same vision. Exact same CHRO, same company, but with a CEO change, then the alignment's gone. And now that person has to, without the alignment, somebody gets fired or quits within a quarter. It's probably the CHRO that gets fired or quits within a quarter. It's not the CEO.
Probably. In most cases.
I think that's fair.
So you talked about data bridging the gap, but in the book, you make a clear distinction from being data driven and insight driven. I'm interested to understand what's the difference from your perspective, and why is being insight driven so critical for HR teams and business leaders today?
Yeah, for sure. I'm convinced that the best HR functions, the number is not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the conversation. So if you've been in HR for a really long time, it was really hard to calculate employee attrition. It was, these were, the numbers were in all sorts of different systems and whatever. And so someone said, what is our attrition or engagement or something? And we would forever, you put up a slide and you say it's 7. And then you say, I'm done now. Because that was really hard to find that data and make sure it was accurate. And that was the end of the conversation. And yes, you're very data driven, but you don't have an insightful conversation. And when I was first started as a chief people officer, I asked everybody who was chief people officer, and I said, what is your quarterly metrics package that you hand to the board of directors, that you hand to the comp committee? Because I had to spin up a comp committee for the first time. And I was the first chief people officer in the organization. So there was not anything. So I pulled from everybody and I said, don't show me any of the confidential data. Just what are you measuring? What are the rows and columns in your spreadsheet? And great companies would hand me something that was the same, company after company after company. I'm like, really? That's it? But it's that you're measuring the same 20 things. I thought amazing companies would measure 100 things, and not so good companies would measure 5 things. And it turns out everybody measures the same 20 things. But great companies, it's the beginning of the conversation. And okay companies, that's the end. So it was like this huge light bulb that it's the insights that you bring to the data, to the metrics. It's the beginning of a very rich business conversation. And you say, It's 7 because, and here's why, and what to do about it. And, all of the business context, and I recommend, and research says, and other companies are doing this, and it's the beginning. And so it's all of that insight. So I was, okay, well, if it's easy to get the number now, how are great CHROs differentiated then? That's when I, through the research, realized it's alignment and culture and support and all of these other things. I thought that, people analytics was the answer, and it's the first part of the answer. It's the beginning, because without the influence and the insight and the relationship, it doesn't matter. You could have the most, accurate number from your people analytics team, can hand that answer to the CHRO and say, okay, now go take this to the CEO. But without that alignment of a relationship, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's not just providing the what, it's the so what and the now what and the context that underpins all that.
Yes.
And it's interesting, Jenny, the research that we do at Insight 222, which we've been doing, we're now 6th year now of doing our annual People Analytics Trend Survey. And we started to identify the companies that are very successful with people analytics. And actually, you mentioned influence. One of those 8 characteristics that we've identified is the influence of the people analytics leader. So that's partly through their relationship with the chief people officer. That could be because they report directly to them, because they equip them not just with the what, but the so what, the now what, the context. But actually because the head of people analytics has a relationship with senior business leaders up to and including the CEO and the CFO and general business managers as well. And it's that, as you said, it's and then as a team, I did actually an episode back in May, I think it was in May, with Janina Voss, who's the CHRO at Rabobank, and she talked about how close her partnership was with with Mark Janssen, who runs people analytics and a number of other things within Rabobank, and how if you're a CHRO without a really good people analytics function, then you're almost running blind a little bit. So I thought that's nice to kind of bit of validation of that there.
Yeah. One of the things in our research was what differentiates really successful CHROs from not is the robustness of their people analytics team and where they report in the hierarchy. So if they report directly to the CHRO and, that they're not just a report team, but they're an insight team, their job is to run the report and also say, the so what and the now what, right? And if they are people analytics team with that business acumen and the influence for the CHRO, then that's one of the things that differentiates great HR from okay.
Yeah, definitely, and it's really interesting. I was going to say something else, which was obviously extremely profound, so much that I forgot.
It always comes back.
But it always comes back. No, and I think the research that you've done, we definitely see that as well. And we actually, that's what I was going to say. So we've seen that the chief people officer, the head of people analytics is increasingly being responsible for people strategy as well. And that kind of then makes that role, then it has to sit on the HR leadership team if you're responsible for strategy and analytics. And we've seen workforce planning come into that as well, and AI strategy for HR and employee listening. So the role's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which is good because it shows that people analytics has gone from probably the periphery of HR much more to the core in successful companies, and analytics and data are underpinning, everything that you're doing across the employee life cycle, but connecting it to the business.
I just want to say, you're talking about so my prediction is that people analytics leaders will be the next CHROs in this this next wave. So I think we can say whatever.
We won't hold you to it, Jenny. Don't worry.
I don't have any data behind this. We're just making this up. I believe the HR business partner role was the one that ascended to the CHRO 40 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And then I saw a huge wave of compensation, if you led a finance piece within HR, the comp leader, because the compensation became really complex. And so if you really mastered comp, then you became the CHRO. I saw, when we started to have all of the magazine titles were like war for talent, war for talent. It was the talent leader that kind of came up. During the crisis of the shortage of talent after, during the pandemic and right after, I saw several talent acquisition leaders, some very strategic talent acquisition leaders move up. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. And so I think that what we'll see is people analytics, that will become the most valuable and the most challenging part of the full scope of all of the things that a CHRO needs to do. And so somebody who really masters that, there's going to be a CEO that says, we can find other people to lead the others. You can hire people that don't have, what you specialize in, and we need that leader at the very top. That's my instinct. Is there any data behind that? I'm just saying that. I don't know if that's
if there isn't.
Yeah.
RJ, and Salvador Marlowe as well, who was Ericsson and Microsoft. He's got a CHRO, and there's probably others that neither of us can remember off the top of our head. But yeah, probably if there isn't data on it, we should probably collect it, Jenny. So, but yeah, I agree with that hypothesis. You mentioned metrics, so let's talk a little bit about metrics as well. And you're right, we do have a tendency to just collect lots of metrics in HR. But what you do, particularly in the book, you call out the tendency to rely on what you call rear view mirror metrics. What's happened rather than what's going to happen. What's the risk of that approach, and what should HR maybe be measuring instead, or as well as if it wants to influence strategy?
So let me give you a quick example. When I led sales enablement at Hewlett Packard, I gave my quarterly results in a QBR, and it turned out that Mark Hurd was in the room, and I put up a slide that said 2,000 sales reps took this 1.5 day class and they gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And 3,000 sales reps took this 2-day class and they gave it a 4.7 out of 5 stars. And isn't this amazing? And he said to me, all I know for sure from what you're showing me is you've wasted a lot of time and a lot of money. And I don't have any evidence that what you're doing makes a difference with our business. And what I was showing was what I could measure. They were backwards looking, and it was time, basically, sales reps out of the field and whether or not they enjoyed their day. But it had no impact on the business. I wasn't able to project forward whether or not this effort and these people sitting in this room and what they felt about it for that day had any impact forward looking on the business. And it set me on my journey to pull data from every different source to be able to say, well, what I know is them sitting in this room and absorbing this information, hopefully. But I don't know how that connects to CRM results or anything else. So that's what I started to do, was to pull together data sources from every different organization. And I think that is still one of the biggest barriers to effective people analytics is the cordoning off of data from one silo to the next within an organization, because people data is in IT and security and finance and sales and it's in every function, which, maybe people analytics should sit within IT. Maybe it should sit in engineering. Maybe HR people analytics is some sort of, cross horizontal function or something like that, to be able to break down those barriers to that data. and it absolutely has to be connected in a way that is forward looking, because a lot of what HR has access to, if you're only working within the HR function, it almost always calculates into backwards looking metrics. And you need to be able to connect it across all of the different functions in order for it to be forward looking.
Yeah, I totally agree. For instance, that the example you gave about the sales enablement you gave for the 1 and 2 day courses and how they were rated, if you were then able to get some business data and say, and this is the impact that it had on sales for the following quarter,
Yeah.
then suddenly Mark probably would have been, okay, that investment of having people off the road, having that 1 or 2 day training course actually paid off, because it cost us X, but we've identified that it had a 4X impact on sales for the following quarter. I mean, I'm simplifying it very, very much, obviously, but because it's not as simple as that, of course. But it's those sorts of things that if you were able to connect that to the business, then and you're right. If we just look at the HR or the people data or the learning data in that example, then we're missing the story, aren't we?
Right. So it sort of automatically, if you only have access to all the data within HR, it's always going to be backwards looking. And it can only be predictive and prescriptive when you pull in the data from other functions and you marry that together. And so really the best HR organizations are led by leaders with a tremendous amount of influence so that they can convince IT and security and legal and finance and sales to put all of that data together. And it's part of the reason why I left HP, was because, Mark Hurd said to me, come back when you can prove what you do matters. And I couldn't, because I only had access to my own data. And everyone else was saying, why do you need that? I'm suspicious. That's not for you. You're not at the right level, whatever. So I had to go to a smaller company, SuccessFactors, to be able to get access to all the data, to be able to run the algorithms to prove that what I do makes a difference.
So referencing what we were talking about earlier about that disconnect between CEOs and the CHRO that you identified in your research, Jenny, and you experienced it yourself. Certainly from speaking to CHROs and from my own experience as well, CEOs don't often challenge HR the way they maybe challenge finance or operations. And I hear that from some of the organizations that we spoke to at the podcasts and the conferences and at some of our Insight 222 events. It's starting to change. I think it probably changed during the pandemic when suddenly the CAO was really relying on the CHRO to give them the pulse of the organization and how people were feeling. But why generally do you think CEOs still accept mediocre reporting or quite vague narratives from HR, whereas they don't from maybe other functions?
Yeah, I think it's still the old story where they haven't experienced it. They haven't personally seen amazing, strategic, impactful HR. They haven't had that personal experience, so they don't know. And the ones who have, they will bring that HR leader with them company to company. I mean, we probably have access to the same data. There's the highest number, or the CEO turnover in the Fortune 500 right now is the highest it's ever been. It's like a 2-year tenure or something like that. And that is what's driving the CHRO turnover. So there's, the lifespan of the public company CHRO is the shortest it's ever been. And, when those new CEOs come on board, they want to bring their person, because it's a shorter and shorter period of time that the market or investors will give that CEO to make an impact. And so they know they don't have 2 quarters to get up to speed or to learn their new HR person or figure out how the organization works. They're going to bring in their person that they know is going to drive results fast, and help them turn around the business, because they're on a short timeline, right? Shorter and shorter every year.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, back to what you said earlier, when the when the CEOs that maybe haven't experienced a CHRO that's delivering huge value to the organization. That's why when they come in and see the examples that you give, and they find a CHRO that is doing that, or is much more in the strategy than maybe they're used to, that's why they maybe pull them back or bring their own person in. Perhaps that's just a hypothesis, by the way. I've got no data to back that up. So what should CEOs be demanding more of from CHROs and the HR function?
It's that business acumen, being able to jump in and not literally lead one of the functions, but have an incredible command of how that company makes money and what are the challenges of the customer base, and what are competitors doing, what is that industry's future trajectory. They should demand excellence in business acumen like any other function. That is probably the biggest differentiator between really the best CHROs and the average pack.
And as we said earlier, Jenny, if you've actually spent time outside HR in the business, maybe in a commercial role, then particularly if it's in the same organization, then you've got a greater understanding of how the business works and how it interacts with customers, etc. And actually, let me just play what I've had Dave Auric on the podcast a couple of times this year, and he's very much saying, HR, CHROs, but also HR leaders, they need to spend more time with all the stakeholders within the business. So obviously, traditionally, the stakeholders that we focus on much in HR are employees and the leadership team. But he was saying, spend time with shareholders, but particularly spend time with customers. Now, obviously, you had that background, obviously having worked in a commercial role within the organization, so you've got an understanding of customers. But have you seen through the research that you've got, or maybe experience yourself, of actually when you're in an HR role, spending time with customers, and how that potentially helps you be a more effective HR leader?
I certainly experienced that at SAP. At SAP, we had an expectation from our CHRO, Stefan Rees, that all of us on the HR leadership team, I think he had 14 direct reports, Stefan Rees, and that we all were customer facing, and that we all were executive sponsors of different customer accounts. And that, I think every year we had to be, it wasn't a constant change, but, we had to have 4 or 5 different SAP strategic accounts, which is, I think, the top 100 or something like that, customers. And we had to be that point of contact for a customer, for anything that they needed, and just, a phone call away. And it was our job to navigate SAP and figure out how to, address a challenge.
And presumably that helped you then with your day-to-day role that you're doing in HR.
Absolutely. So that was an expectation from him, and it was absolutely great. And then I learned so much there, and I make sure that when I'm a CHRO, that's expectation I have for my teams.
No, that's a really good learning, I think, for listeners on that. That leads quite nicely. You've just given a really good example there of an organisation, or certainly a CHRO that was successfully driving that closer HR business relationships. What other patterns do you see in organizations that have successfully transformed HR into an insight-driven function?
Yeah, I think that knowing all the new technology that's coming out, and that when an HR organization takes it upon itself to always be learning about what's new, and create a rhythm of every month, or a couple times a month, to reach out to vendors and partners and get a demo. And just like everything that is new in learning technology and just get demo after demo after demo. You don't want to be a jerk and say, make that partner think that there's a sale there. There's no sale. I'm just trying to educate my team. And, every week go out and, have a new demo. And, it's a whatever, like an open office hours where anybody in the organization can call in and hear about it. And especially dig into the analytics and reporting of different technology and really work with startups because they're so much more innovative than big companies. Like when I was at Success Factors, this is a giant machine, and anything that's big just can't innovate as fast. So really focus on startups and really dig into the reporting and just be so curious and open to how could we do things differently? How could we do things differently? And how could a different approach to data analytics, insights, metrics, inform what we're doing? And I think that every 6 months, we're going to have a radical change in how metrics and data and analytics and insights are used within HR, kind of moving forward for the foreseeable future for years. And if we don't stay curious and open to that, then we're going to get behind very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that external view is so important, isn't it? Because as you said, things are changing so fast. If you just focus on what you've currently got, but for this, it's still quick from a technology perspective. If you just focus on your current technology suite and you don't look at what else is going out there, even from the vendors that you're partnering with, then you're going to get behind quite quickly. I mean, one of the things we do at Insight 222 is we have peer-to-peer sharing as well. So learning what your colleagues in other organizations are doing. Ours happens to be people analytics, but it could be, understand what your peers in talent acquisition or learning or comp and Ben are doing. I don't know how much comp and Ben share of each other, but certainly there are parts of HR that are happy to learn from peer organizations as well, because things are changing so quickly, aren't they? And as you said, we've talked about some of the other patterns that you've seen about that really close proximity to the business, thinking about the actual the so what and the now what rather than just the what and everything else, and thinking probably if we look at AI, I'm interested in your thoughts around there, Jenny, of some of those organizations that maybe are outpacing others. What are some of those companies thinking about when it comes to AI, or doing already when it comes to AI from an HR perspective?
Yeah. I think we're going to see smaller and smaller teams that technology and AI-driven technology is going to be absolutely central to everything that the HR function does. I think there are going to be fewer and fewer humans because of what can be accomplished with. I'm absolutely blown away with everything that I am able to do just using Claude and ChatGPT that used to take armies of humans. My personal output can mimic, a function of 100 people from 5 years ago. And so I'm concerned certainly about early talent and their role and how they get up to speed. But CHROs should be challenging their functions. There should be no humans hired unless you can prove to me that what you need accomplished can't be done by AI, can't be done by some sort of system. I think the bigger legacy companies are really in a difficult spot. I don't think you want to have a regular HRIS as your interface anymore. I think organizations, HR organizations should go through an exercise where they let's pretend we have no technology at all, absolutely nothing. What would we want to get done? And just imagine it. We would want, what are the outcomes we want? Don't think about systems. Don't think about workflows. Don't think about how things are traditionally done, from talent attraction to talent acquisition to onboarding to performance and goals. Like, don't think about that. Like, we want, engaged employees who are, think about that sort of future back thing, and then go to AI and say, what prompt should I give you to be able to achieve this outcome? And have the AI generate for you what to ask it to achieve that outcome. And, how could we create this automatically? How could AI create this? And I think people are going to find that they're going to be using the systems that they have more as systems of record and not of systems of engagement. I think that any technology that was created pre-AI and that is now trying to backwards add some AI features on top of their system of record, I think is really behind. It is phenomenal what some of the most progressive organizations are creating now. What was your question? I can't remember.
I think you've just, you basically identified, we just don't know. We don't know at the moment, do we? Because things are changing so quickly. It's interesting. One of the things that you said about early talent, we had Peter Hinson on the show a few weeks ago, and he talked about how AI, the new people coming into the workforce, certainly over the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to be AI natives, like we were talking about digital natives, and you just wonder what they will be able to do, because they'll be, again, I'm generalizing here. I'm not saying we've got all this generation nonsense that we hear about, but that a lot of those people are going to be AI natives, and they're going to, their skill on using some of these applications versus someone like me, for example, even though I'm forcing myself to use it at least an hour a day, and actually, as you have just talked about, starting to see the real benefits that it provides, and around productivity as I get better at using it. But we all need to invest in that time, and yes, in HR, of course, we're going to be responsible for upskilling and reskilling the organization, but we also need to think about ourselves as well. I think this leads quite nicely into the next question I wanted to ask you, Jenny, as well. You were talking about essentially there reimagining how we deliver HR, and maybe, as you said, forgetting about the technology we've got at the moment to a certain degree, and think about how we would deliver that employee experience and those outcomes that we want to deliver. You've got a really valid point in the book around how HR needs to operate more like a product organization. In your view, what does that look like in practice? And if you've got any examples that you can share with listeners, great. But otherwise, what are some of the elements of that?
Yeah. Well, my whole work experience has been in enterprise software. So in enterprise software, the product team sits in between what customers want. So they talk to customers. What do you want? What problem are you trying to solve? Sometimes customers say, I want it to be blue. They don't want that. They think they want that. So a product team does a lot of conversations with customers. What is the real problem they're trying to solve? So they're very business savvy. And then they are in between engineering. Okay, this is what customers need. That's not what they want, but it's what they need. Can we build that? How much would it cost to build that? And then they sit between sales and they say, if we were to answer this need with this thing that we built, could we sell it? And what would we sell it for? And could customers afford it? Can they afford to answer their need? And then they sit between, customer success. So they're really in the center of strategy, for, the strategy of the company. And if HR was more like that, we could say, we would not be order takers, right? Because an internal customer would say, I need project management training. And if HR goes and gives them project management training, it doesn't solve their problem. Because, okay, why do you think you need project management training? What's going on in your organization that's leading you to think that that's the solution? Well, no one's doing their projects on time. Okay, let me dig into that a little bit. Why aren't they doing their projects on time? Turns out they hate the manager. They think the manager's a jerk and they want the manager to fail, and they're hoping some savior above will come in and fire the manager if everybody starts like a mutiny and not doing their projects on time or whatever. That's an exact actual example of something that happened. And if HR was more like a product organization, what can we afford? What do people really need? How is that different from what they say they want? Does that solve the problem? Will it cause more problems downstream if we fix it than if we don't? Because we could fix something and it could cause massive problems that are bigger down the line. So having that business grounding, like a product organization, can we build it? Would people buy it? Can we afford that? How does that cannibalize other product lines? Is that the right thing for the organization, overall, to cannibalize a different product line? That's what HR should be doing. It's incredibly consultative. And it's very big picture, and it brings together all of these details and that strategy. That would be phenomenal. And so many leaders said to me in the interview process, God, it would be great if HR act like product.
So let's start with what's the outcomes you're trying to affect? Is this something we can build and scale? So it's it's going to be worth the investment. And then I guess the other thing that you've talked about to an extent there is, we need to think about user experience. Because if we want to build a product, then we've got to build a product that people need, but obviously that's easy for them to use, just like we would if we were building it for a customer. Then we get the adoption that we need, and then hopefully we get the outcomes that we're trying to impact as well. Jenny, a couple of questions just to finish. So maybe to kind of summarize before we get to the question of the series. What would you advise those listening who are looking to build that insight-driven muscle? Maybe 2 or 3 things that they can do to really try and help build that muscle.
Yeah, I would take on a stretch project with one of your clients in the business. So let's say you're an HR business partner and you support sales. Go and take on a sales project, so in sales enablement, in sales operations, and sales readiness, something like that. Be as close to your customer as you can. If you are early in your career, honestly, leave HR and come back. That's going to be the best thing for you. Even if it is a lateral, you're a HR generalist, go be an entry-level person in sales, in marketing, in something where you've got a good set of transferable skills, and then come back, and you will be amazed at the difference in perspective. I am a huge fan of go get an MBA. You do not need a master's of organizational behavior. You don't need a master's of psychology. You don't need a master's of, industrial organizational design, blah, 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 whatever. Go get an MBA. That's what is going to differentiate you in your career. The more training, education you can do in general business, I think the better off you'll be in the long term.
So sometimes you move sideways to move upwards. And as you said, continuous learning. But if you're going to be working in HR, you're a business person that happens to work in HR. So that the MBA kind of qualification that you're talking about there. Jenny, this is the last question, and this is the question we're asking everyone on this series of the Digital HR Leaders podcast, and I think it'll help you better put your practitioner hat on, but there might be some insights from the book as well. How can HR lead the shift to skills-powered workforce planning?
By putting on an AI-first hat and think about breaking jobs apart, that the construct of the job is out of date, and think about what are the outcomes and deliverables that every job is supposed to achieve, and then think, how could AI drive all of those deliverables, or what deliverables within that job could AI drive? And if you go through that exercise, you will come down to skills. And you'll be able to break that apart to knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies, behaviors, whatever, that are going to drive those deliverables, those outcomes. And through that exercise, you can say, these ones will be driven by AI agents on their own. These ones will be driven by humans plus technology plus AI, humans plus machines, whatever that looks like. This is humans by themselves. And you'll be able to sort of do that workforce design to say, what are the skills that are needed? If you just keep peeling that away, you'll get down to the fundamental skills that are needed by, activity, by deliverable. What do you think?
I don't know how to answer the questions, Jenny. No, I'm joking. I think just building on what you said, ultimately, firstly, is being skills powered the right thing for your organization? And I think it might not be in every part of the organization. And this is based on some of the conversations that we've had on the podcast. But, and again, what you were saying there is, what's the business challenge we're trying to solve, and how can AI in this case, as in your example, and how can skills help us to solve that? I think that's always where I would start. And again, based on the conversations that I've had on the podcast and the work we do at Insight 222, I think there's it's a bit like AI skills is one of the big hype topics that we've had in the space for a couple of years. I think AI feeds skills, both because jobs are changing so fast that skills become the currency on kind of understanding how we deconstruct and reconstruct jobs moving forward. So doing a pilot, I think is something that we've seen in organizations that are doing this very well. We've had examples on the podcast from Arcadis recently, from EPAM Systems, from Standard Chartered, from Unilever, around how they all did that quite successfully in terms of building that workforce planning moving forward. But ultimately, as you said, AI is going to make differences to tasks. As you said, certain tasks are going to be able to be automated, and we'll use AI, we'll use agents. The technology will create new tasks as well, which might be ones that humans can do. So I guess having that understanding and be able to break the jobs down is just going to be very important moving forward. I can't believe you've got me to answer a question on my own podcast, but that's very, very skillful of you.
I think the conversation about skills is very navel gazing, is very, it feels overly academic, and it feels like a distraction of us in HR grasping for the new buzzword, as opposed to saying, what does this question even mean? And what are we really trying to accomplish here? I think in HR, we need less psychology and more sociology. We need less what are my skills? How do I know myself? And more about how do I work with the business, with the world, to get something accomplished. Talking about, you could have amazing skills and not being able to accomplish results. Yes, you have an incredible skill at project management, but you don't do it. Like, you're not motivated to do it. Like, I would rather talk about outcomes. I would rather talk about results. I would rather talk about achievements. And if if you have to do it the hard way, but you get it done, I don't care how you get it done. Like you have you have amazing skills in this, that, and the other. But you can't harness those skills to drive an outcome. It sort of feels self-indulgent to talk about.
I think, as Dave Warwick says, Jenny, HR isn't about HR. HR is about the business and basically business outcomes at the end of the day. And as you said, if we start with the outcomes first, and it may be that being skills based will help us achieve those outcomes, and if that's the case, then it might be worth the investment. But we shouldn't start with, we want to be skills based. And I think that's, as you said, who cares? I think, Jenny, that's a great point to end this episode. Thank you very much for being a guest on the show. Really enjoyed our conversation. How can people find out more about the work that you're doing, find out more about the Insight Driven Leader, and follow all the great work that you're doing?
Yeah. I have a personal website, jennydearborn.com. Everything that I do is captured there. I work at BTS. I'm the Chief People Strategy Officer there. Certainly able to contact me or BTS through those channels. The book is available online everywhere books are sold. It's in a handful of bookstores in the US. Whatever. LinkedIn, send out a pigeon, an owl, whatever. Just stand on your porch and shout and I'll hear you.
We need more pigeons, that's for sure. Jenny, thanks so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks. Good to talk to you.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.